Welcome to this week's episode of Trista's Plate Story podcast. I'm Trista Polo from iwokeupawesome.com, and I am your host. Each week we learn the story behind that vanity plate. You know, the one you saw driving down the road? What did it say? What did it mean? Why did they choose it? This week we meet Sheldon Neal from Irvine, California. His vanity plate story was featured in an LA Times article chosen from thousands of entries. He's a retired IT project manager who fills his time now with working on cars, lawn bowling, and exploring the beautiful areas of the California coast with his wife. Sheldon grew up on a farm and shares some fascinating information about how farming has changed since his childhood. He also shares how a personal physical trait played a role in his self-worth growing up and led him to realizing one important thing we all share. This gave him self-confidence, and I think you will agree from hearing his story, a good life. We'll speak with Sheldon in a moment, but first I have some exciting news to share. I have been chosen by Facebook to be a digital creator. If you don't already, I invite you to follow me there for lots of great short-form video content about self-worth, positive mindset, and plenty of laughs. As of this recording, I'm the only Trista Polo on Facebook, so I should be easy enough to find. In the meantime, let's go meet Sheldon and hear the story behind his vanity plate, Dad's Mud. Welcome to this week's episode of Trista's Plate Story podcast. I'm here with Sheldon Neal. His plate is Dad's Mud. He's from Irvine, California. Welcome, Sheldon.
Thank you.
Great to have you. Yeah, absolutely. So Dad's Mud. Now, this is a plate that was featured in the LA Times article. So why don't you start by telling us a little about your plate, and then we'll get into your experience in the article.
I grew up in central Illinois, and there, most of the four-wheeling you do is either snow or mud. So after I moved to California, still enjoyed doing a lot of four-wheel drive stuff, but did a lot of mud also. We were camping up in Big Bear one weekend when my younger son was probably 7 or 8 years old. And so we had done a lot of trails during the day and thrown a lot of mud up on the truck, and I was a Pathfinder. And so when we got back to camp, he went up to the fender and scratched in my dad's mud, in the mud that was on the fender. Well, I saw it and I kind of got on him about it. I said, you shouldn't be doing that. You'll scratch the paint, blah, 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 blah. So once we got home from that trip, I was washing the Pathfinder. I saw pinstriping scratches all down the side of it from driving through brush and stuff. So then I felt kind of guilty that I had gotten on him about it. So that's when I ordered the Dad's Mud plate, and it's been with me ever since. That was probably 96, maybe. And this is now the third vehicle I've had it on. So
awesome. And how old was he at the time?
He was 7 or 8, something like that.
7 or 8.
It's something that I ordered just to kind of ease his pain and let him know that I wasn't really angry about it, that took it all in good stride. And
That's great. That's great. Did you do a lot of those kind of trips with your families?
Yeah, we did a lot. We would do mostly like tent camping, probably once or twice a month when they were growing up. We were in the Boy Scouts, so we did hiking, backpacking, did a 20-mile hike with the Boy Scouts one day. But then we've always had a four-wheel drive truck of some sort. So we like going out exploring in the mountains and the desert, and you can see a lot of things out there if you're willing to drive and to hike that you won't see anywhere else. And
Yeah.
it's kind of cool because now, of course, both my sons are adults. They're like mid-30s, but they still enjoy going out camping and hiking, and so that's been kind of a lifelong gift to them, I think.
Sure.
For that as well.
That's great. Your vanity plate is Dad's Mud, but that's not the only vanity plate you have, is it?
No, I got 4 vehicles, and all of them have some significance to their plate.
Well, we have to talk about that. So tell me about your other vanity plates.
Okay, so I've got a Jeep Cherokee that the plate is KM6ZMJ, which is my ham radio license, my ham radio call sign. So the state of California lets you do that one for free if you've got your ham license. And then I've got 2 other vehicles, a 73 Chevy Vega and a 67 Nissan Patrol. That the Vega I have Eek Vega, and then the Patrol is Eek Patrol. And the long story around that goes back to early 60s NHRA drag racing, where the Chrysler Hemi was kind of the king of the drag strip, and it was a large motor, so they called it an elephant motor. Along came the small block Chevy, and NHRA kind of changed their weight guidelines and that sort of thing. And small block Chevy made a lot of power for its size, so it started winning at the drag strip. So they started calling it a mouse motor, and especially Grumpy Jenkins was world famous for winning with the mouse motor. He was the first one that actually put one in a Vega and won a lot of races in it. So the reason they came up with that is what's the only thing an elephant is afraid of is a mouse, right? So the Hemis were afraid of the small block Chevrolets. And in the Vega and in the Patrol, I've got a small block Chevrolet in each of those. So I call them Eek Patrol because there's a mouse in it.
Eek a mouse.
Yeah. Uh,
That's very clever. That's very clever. Because you're into cars, right?
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
figured that all my life. Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. I want to talk about the history of vanity plates in your family because you sent me some pictures and you had this original plate. So I'll include a picture of it in the video version. But tell us a little bit about the history of vanity plates in your family.
Yeah, this was in the early 70s in Illinois. All automobiles, their plates ran 2 letters and then 4 numbers, and trucks would run 5 numbers and then the weight classification in a letter. Dad always had trouble remembering his license plate, so mom, you could special order as long as it was in that same sequence. So mom ordered JN2403 because he was called Junior Neal, and then 2403 was the last 4 digits of their telephone number, 736-2403. So he could finally remember his plate because it was Junior Neal 2403, which was also funny because he was called Junior. He and I used to bowl in a lot of tournaments together. You know, and so you'd go to sign in and they'd say, okay, Sheldon Neal, Junior Neal. And then they'd always look at me and say, Junior, what's your average? And I'd go, no,
You're the younger.
he's the junior. I'm the Sheldon.
I love that there's a history of vanity plates and specialized plates, I guess. I don't know if you would call that vanity plates because I know vanity plates weren't always a thing. And this sounds like this was before vanity license plates became
Yeah.
available.
And I actually had a truck at the time that I had 61839B, which I lived in a town called D-Land, and the zip code there was 61839. So just something else. And then when I moved to California, I had SMNEAL as my plate, which I didn't keep. I should have kept that, but
Because your middle initial is M.
yeah, which growing up I didn't care for. But then as I got to be older, my grandfather lived in Kentucky, was Mort Allen Neal. Dad was just Mort Neal. That's where he got the junior. When he went into the army, he had to pick a middle name. So he just picked Junior. So it became Mort Junior Neal. I'm Sheldon Mort Neal, and my older son is Matthew Mort Neal. So we've got 4 generations now of Morts.
Wow. I actually worked for a Mort when it was my first job out of college. I worked in this very high powered, busy brokerage office in the city near where I live. And he was the nicest guy, just like huge heart, really, really great guy. He has since passed away, but the name Mort means something to me as well. So I'm glad you shared what your middle initial was for. Yeah, that's very cool. So you definitely earned the right to be in a vanity license plate article, right? Because of your vanity license plate and your specialized license plate history. But they probably didn't know that about you. So how did you end up being in this article?
My son is hooked up with the LA Times on Twitter. So he's on their Twitter feed. And one of the journalists there, who was actually a summer intern, she's in college back east somewhere, Boston, I think, but she sent out a tweet that said, "I'm doing arts and lifestyle article on vanity plates. If you know of anyone that has an interesting plate, hook me up and we'll talk." And my son's like, "Oh yeah, I got your guy."
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, I emailed her and talked with her a couple of times, and then she thought it was pretty interesting, and we set up the photo shoot and did that at a little park in Placentia. Yeah, it was kind of interesting. I think it came out in November, like the first part of
Hmm.
November, maybe.
Yeah, November of 2021 is when it came out. That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
How has it been for you since the article came out? I mean, obviously, I reached out to you as a result of the article. Have you had any other connections or contacts or opportunities as a result?
Nothing really serious. I've had a guy that lives down the alley. I was actually out working on my truck, and he's lived there almost as long as I have. He just stopped and said, "I saw your article in the LA Times," and so that's pretty neat. And then also somebody at the lawn bowling club had seen it, and so we talked about it some. That's really been about it, I think. Um, well, and I sent it to my sister, and she was pretty excited about it. So uh,
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, listen, the LA Times has millions of followers and a huge reader base.
mhm,
So it's pretty cool. I don't know if that's quite all of your 15 minutes of fame, but it's probably a couple of seconds worth anyway.
that's what I'm counting on. Yeah, this is like a minute, so I still got 14 left to use up, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Now, you mentioned lawn bowling. You're retired now, right?
Yes, from
Yeah.
the
But you
I
keep very busy.
yes, yeah, I like to. There's
Yeah.
just so much fun stuff to do.
There's so much to do. You just don't even have time for all the fun stuff there is.
Yes.
So lawn bowling, I know, is one of the things you do, but I didn't know what that was when we first spoke. So can you tell us what is lawn bowling?
It's similar to bocce ball. So you have lawn bowl, which is a little bit bigger than a softball, maybe about that size. So you'll have four of those as a set, and then you have a little white ball that's called the jack. So you roll the white ball down to a spot at the other end, and then essentially you're just rolling your bowls, trying to get them closest to the jack. Now in bocce ball, I think they roll pretty straight, so you can try and make changes. In lawn bowls, they actually have a bias built into them. So as it's rolling down and it starts to slow down, it'll turn one way or the other. And they have different biases built into them. So you can buy a set of bowls that has very minimal bias, or you can buy one that'll really go sideways at the end. And depending on, because you can usually play either two people to a team or three people to a team. So depending on where you're playing, having a straighter bowl or a larger bias bowl can be advantageous. If you're rolling first, having the straight bowl where you can just kind of go straight to the jack is more advantageous. But if you're now rolling third, and you've already got 16 bowls out there in the way, so now you may have to have a larger bias pole so you can kind of hook around them and work your way back in. So it's fascinating game. And very, very simple initially, but getting good at it is very difficult. I grew up
Yeah.
doing 10-pin bowling a lot because in winters in Illinois, there's not a lot else to do. So for me, the biggest thing was, I was figuring out what they call the weight, which is how far the bowl is actually going to go, because you're on a contained course. So I was always throwing it into the other end. It took me a long time to figure out how to throw the weight properly. But the place we play is in Laguna Beach, and it's on a bluff overlooking the ocean. So it's just, right on the California Riviera. So it's a beautiful place to play, and the people there are really friendly and nice. So I mean, it's just a very pleasant thing to do.
That sounds like a lot of fun. And you're in the kind of weather that you can probably play all year.
Yeah. Right after a rain, sometimes the grounds will be too wet to play, but and then of course if it gets below 60, we complain about how cold it is, but we can live with that somehow.
Being in New York, I'm just gonna let that one go right by. So you are retired. You're retired from IT, right? Tell us a little about what you did when you were working.
So I started out as a programmer, um, actually writing assembler code way back in the day, and then just sort of advanced through the ranks up through system analyst, then got into project manager and then a manager. And it was great fun most of the time. But as time went on, what happened was, as a project manager, they had the technology to automate delivery of a lot of things like databases and servers and that sort of thing. So it got to where the technician delivering it could push a button and pretty much have your server ready, within an hour, which was great for the customer. But for the person running the project, they could get things delivered before I could even write the project plan. And so as a project manager, you just fall further and further and further behind. So my job got to a point where I figured I had to get out of there and go somewhere else. And that's where I met with my financial planner. And I said, okay, I got to get out of this place. Am I looking for a new job or am I retiring? And he ran the numbers and he said, well, at your current spend rate, assume a conservative investment return. He said, you're probably good for money till you're 95. And I thought, well, I'm willing to roll the dice on that one. I'll take a chance.
Right. That's great that you had that set up for yourself. And how old were you when you retired?
61.
That's young to retire.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially these days. So I have to ask, what advice can you give people who are younger, who would like to not have to live out their life earning, who would like to have a financial advisor say, I think you can actually retire now? What advice would you give? Because clearly you made some good choices along the way.
I mean, like everyone says, start early, uh, which I did not, and never tap into your investments, which I didn't follow that either. So that's learned lessons.
So far we still can mess it up and actually be able to retire. Keep going.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, if you're working for a corporation, almost all of them have matching funds. Well, that's just free money. So you need to take advantage of that. But additionally, I think to do the study and not be afraid to invest on your own. I did a lot of study on the stock market and, you know, tried a lot of different methods to see what would actually work. And in the long run, then I had pretty good success at investing in individual stocks. But I did read a lot about, because there's different ways you can go about investing in the market. You can do, value investing, which is when you do the research on a company and kind of find out companies that are underpriced according to their value. You can also look at more technical analysis, which is really just watching how the stock is behaving in the market and looking for trends where people are looking to buy that stock. I think either way works fine. You just have to kind of pick whatever method works best for you and then manage your money well. I think that's one of the bigger things is if you invest in a stock and you see it start to go down, don't wait forever to get rid of it. Because as a stock falls, if a stock falls 10%, it's got to gain 15% to get back up to zero. So you kind of lose track of that, that as the stock loses value, it takes a lot more to get it back up. So cutting your losses quickly, I think is important. And then, yeah, the longer term you can do it, the better. And I think the stock market's a scary thing to a lot of people, which is why I say I think the more you can read and understand about it and understand the workings of it, you can get more and more comfortable with it. That and managing your
Sure.
money so you don't take big losses, I think is the biggest thing.
That's really great advice. Do you still invest today or are you sort of just writing out the work you did in the past?
I'm sort of writing, I turn it over to the professionals. So I've got we're just invested in like mutual funds now. Although I did buy Apple just before it split, just because I never had a stock split before. So that was just for
Oh,
fun.
So you're married, you have kids. Tell me about your wife. How did you meet? What's that meet cute? Since you're in LA area, we got to talk about the meet cute.
I grew up in central Illinois on a farm. She grew up on the south side of Chicago. Her dad worked for the city. He was a carpenter for the city of Chicago. So he had to live within the city confines, within Chicago proper. So he lived in the farthest south, like the last street in the city proper before you hit suburbs. So she grew up there. She was married and moved out here like in the late 70s, I think. I moved out here in 81, went to programmer school, got a job doing programming. There was a group of us that used to go out on Friday nights, to bars and just kind of hang out. She was one of that group. I actually ended up working for her for a while. And then there was a big racquetball club, it was a part of our office play. And so I started playing racquetball with some of the people, and one of the girls that was much better than I said, I know somebody that's about the same level as you. You two should play. So she and I started playing racquetball together. And then afterwards we would sit and talk, for like an hour or two. And that just kind of evolved and eventually got a little more romantic. And I said, but you're married. And her marriage hadn't been good for quite some time. So that eventually went away. And then we got married and we're still at it. So that was
And you're living happily ever after.
yes. That was in November of 85. We got married.
Awesome. And how is she also retired or she still works?
So she actually retired a year before I did. And I had never really thought about retiring until I went to her retirement party. I'm sitting there going, this is interesting. And then in that year, I got a new assignment that got more and more difficult as it went. It was kind of the same thing when she was, at the point where you kind of dread Sunday afternoon because you have to go back to work on Monday. So at that point, we met with our financial advisor, and he said, yeah, you're good. As long as Sheldon continues working this long, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, she retired at that. But then, a year later, things had changed again, and we were able to pull it off.
So you do a lot of stuff and you're keeping pretty active with your retirement. Do you enjoy retirement together or do you kind of have your own things that you do?
Mostly together. We do the lawn bowling. Lawn bowling is probably the most frequent. We used to travel a lot, but that's kind of been put on hold over the last couple of years. I still like to do 10-pin bowling, which she does not like. And I was in a league up until the pandemic hit, but I haven't gotten back into that yet because, that's all indoors, of course. About the only trips we've done the last couple of years, we've been up into wine country a couple of times, actually more than a couple, 4 or 5, like Napa, Sonoma, and then Santa Barbara, so just going up there like for a week or so and staying in a bed and breakfast, going to wineries, doing some hiking. So we do a lot of that.
Lovely. So you mentioned a couple of times that you grew up in Illinois. And when we had talked before this, that was a pretty interesting childhood. You were on a farm, right? You grew up on a farm?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me a little about that.
So yeah, it was a corn and soybean farm. Most of them lives outside of a little town called Weldon. Weldon's a town of like 450 people. That's what people used to call me, Sheldon from Weldon. But yeah, it was, like I say, corn and soybeans. I think one of the things we talked about was the sort of the evolution of agriculture, because my dad grew up in Kentucky, in eastern Kentucky, and they were primarily tobacco farmers, which was highly manual at the time. By the time he grew up, I think they had actually stopped growing tobacco on their farm, but they had a tobacco base that you could sell to another farmer so they could grow it, in better ground kind of thing. But when Dad first moved up to Illinois, they were still picking corn by hand, so you'd have a horse-drawn wagon that you'd walk in front of and snap off the ears of corn and throw them back into the wagon, which then made you a very good softball pitcher and a very good horseshoe thrower because you had that. So Dad was always good at those also. But it was as I was growing up, then we had a 2-row tractor drawn corn picker that would automatically, pull the corn on the cob and throw it back into a wagon. And then we would load that into the corn crib that it would sit there for the winter and dry out. Then you'd have pay people to come out and shell it off the cob and then take it to the grain elevator. Eventually that again evolved into what they call now a combine, which, or actually at the time, Dad called it a picker sheller, because now you could go through with one machine that would take in 4 rows and pull it off on the cob and then actually shell the corn off and put that in a hopper and throw the cob out the back. And I remember Dad being so fascinated. He could just stand there and watch that. And at the time, I don't think I really understood, why it was so fascinating to him. But to be able to go from, hand picking to just driving this machine that now suddenly you're just dumping, shelled corn into your truck to drive to the elevator was just such a leap technologically, I think, for him that, he remained fascinated by it. And since I've left now with computers and GPS units and all sorts of sensors they have now going through to the field on the combine, it's measuring the yield as you go through and mapping that out on a field so you can see where you've got higher yields, lower yields, and then adjust your fertilizer in the spring accordingly. And they don't barely need to drive the tractors because a lot of them are GPS controlled, so they keep them straight on the road. Going to end up being like Dad used to talk about the factory of the future, where the only two living things in there will be a man and a dog. And the man's there to feed the dog, and the dog is there to make sure the man doesn't touch any of the equipment. So that's really what farming is getting to, I think.
How much of the farming did you do growing up?
Oh, a lot. I was probably spending all day on a tractor from the time I was like 10 or 11, doing more simple things. It's called hoeing corn, where you're just kind of driving up and down the rows when the corn's still pretty small. So the amount of damage you can do is kind of minimal. When you get later in the year into the harvest, then that's more crucial operation. So I didn't really do a lot of that until I was an adult, which I graduated high school, went off to college for a semester. I wasn't a very good student, so I moved to another college for another year and then worked as a mechanic for a while. And then came back and farmed 5 more summers with Dad, as a mid-20 some, and eventually figured out that I wanted something else to do. You really have to love farming, I think, to stay in it. I mean, it's a wonderful occupation if it's in your blood, but if not, it's a lot of hard work, which, anything you're good
Sure.
at is a lot of hard work. But I just found some more interesting things out here, especially in computers. Computers always fascinated me. But yeah, and then all through growing up, we basically spend the summer walking beans because you'd have soybeans, and the rows were 36 inches apart when I was young. They eventually went to 30 inches. But during the summer, you have to walk up and down the bean rows cutting out weeds. So we would spend from, I don't know, April or May through probably August when the beans would get up, this tall and then start to tangle. So you'd end up doing more harm than good trying to walk through them. But you spend most days out walking beans. And if you weren't walking beans, then you were mowing roadsides or, doing something like that. So yeah, it was pretty
A
constant.
working summer for sure.
Yes, yes. And Dad always had probably a 2 or 3 acre garden. And so for a while, I had a roadside stand set up that I would sell produce out of. And then on Saturday morning, we each had full size pickup trucks. And so we would go out Saturday morning and pick sweet corn because he'd have like 4 acres of sweet corn. So we'd pick that and fill both pickup trucks full and then go down to Decatur and sell them at a farmer's market down there. And he always enjoyed that because, gave him some time to show off his wares and interact with people.
Yeah.
Yeah, he always liked that.
Very nice. Like you said, it's definitely a calling to take all
Yes.
of that on. for
Yeah.
sure. So, one of the questions I always like to ask, because I do a lot of work with people that I work with on their self-worth, is how has self-worth played a role in your life? Growing up on a farm, going into something much more mind-based than physical labor, and now retiring early. How has self-worth played a role in your life?
I think growing up, as I mentioned to you last time, I have a small handicap. I've got a missing radius bone in my right arm. I think growing up in a largely physical based society with a handicap like that, I don't know that you're ever really conscious of it, but subconsciously you kind of feel like you're different. So I think a lot of the ways I dealt with that back in my youth is that I would always kind of do more or be funnier or, more willing to take a risk or drink more than the next guy to try and keep the attention away from, the physical difference. And people would always say, you think about it more than anybody else, which is absolutely true, but it's different when you're in that spot. And I did okay physically. I wasn't a good athlete, which in a small town like that, star football player, star basketball player, they're really the cool guys.
Sure, that's true in any place, not just a farming town.
But I could make people laugh, so that kind of put me in a different cool group. But then also got me in a lot of trouble sometimes. But yeah, you learn. But then I think you're kind of wanting to strive for more. We didn't grow up wealthy by any means. Like I always like to say, I grew up a poor sharecropper's son, and my wife kind of looks at me and goes, "What?" And I said, "Well, yeah, actually, it was gave half the crop to the landowners, and he took half of it, which is exactly what sharecropping is."
Wow.
And when I was
Yeah.
born, he wasn't even a sharecropper; he was a hired man by the month. So yeah, when we were growing up, we didn't have a lot of money. There was one time, I don't know, I was probably 7 or 8 because I never really felt like we were poor until this moment. Mom bought me a straw cowboy hat at the mule barn in Forsyth. And on the front of it, it said, "I may be poor, but at least I'm good looking." So, I put this hat on and I looked up at Mom and I said, "Well, at least one of these things is true." And she's like,
Right.
"No, Sheldon, they're both true." I was like, "Oh,
They're
what?
both true, and you're like, "Wait, I'm poor?"
We are poor?" So I think that kind of pushed me to want to make some money somehow. So
Yeah.
I occasionally would buy a get rich kind of thing off out of the newspaper or off the late night TV or that sort of thing, which none of those ever really panned out. But one consistent thing I saw in them is it would talk about getting your mind right to do this. So whatever your scheme is, you have to be in kind of the right mind frame or mindset in order to be successful. And so then that sort of led to me, reading more self-help kind of books and, pop psychology and that sort of thing. And I think that helped me build a lot of confidence and then just kind of trying some different things. And then one day coming to the realization that virtually everyone is insecure about something. And that kind of gave me a great comfort that, oh, I'm not the only one that's scared of doing stuff. Well, let's go try some more stuff then. And I think that then the more successes you have, the more that just kind of snowballs. And that's been the case for me. Yeah, I've tried a lot of different things and had some success and had some failures, but then you just kind of say, okay, I learned something from that. So that's what I would tell people on lawn bowling. I either won today or I learned something today. And that's the only two results that come out of this. And so I think if you kind of approach everything with that sort of attitude, you can do some good things.
Yeah, absolutely. You put that on top of anything, and you'll end up successful because you won't quit from
Mm.
failure. In fact, I would guess that's probably why you did well in the stock market. If you didn't make money on a stock, you learned something from that and
Yeah.
took it to the next investment and the next investment and ended up building, a nice retirement for yourself. So, yeah, I think that's great to add to anything that you're doing in life.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. Anything else you want us to know about you before we wrap up today?
What else? I'm taking acting classes, which is fun. And that's another thing too, peeking under the covers to understand how the business works. I'm seeing that a lot now. I'm taking a screen acting class, and the teacher has worked a lot in the business, so the way we do scenes and shoot them in class, and then he goes away for a week and edits it, and then shows us the scene afterwards. It's fascinating to learn how the process works. So I've been learning a lot about that. It's not always the first take.
That's right.
Mhm.
I've done a lot of improv acting, which I really enjoy. It creates an opportunity for courage and the ability to just go with anything and help hold other people up, and, that whole say yes and see what happens and figure out how to deal with whatever happens next in the scene. I found that to be a lot of fun, and it really stretched me as well.
I did a one evening improv workshop 6 months or so ago. It wore me out.
It is a little physical. Yeah.
Yeah, reacting that quickly. Yeah, that's part of what the teacher said. That's part of the fun of it is I don't want you to think. I want you to just react.
Mm,
But that's hard to
that's
do.
right.
That's something you have to train yourself to do, I think.
For sure. If you spend too much time in your head trying to think of the next thing to say, trying to be funny, trying to do it, then it'll be terrible. But
Yeah.
if you let yourself go and just authentically trust the process and the rules of the game and whatever else is about to happen and the other people that you're in the scene with, it can actually create some pretty magical stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Just got to get out of your own way.
That's exactly right. Well, you're in the right town. You're in
Yeah.
the right town to be able to pursue acting, even if it's just for fun and to explore it for your own internal and personal development.
Keeps me thinking.
Keeps you thinking and keeps your brain young, that's for sure, right?
Yes. That's the goal.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I always like to turn the table before we wrap up and see if you have a question for me. Do you have a question you'd like to ask me before we finish up?
I am curious about your mechanism. So the story ran in the LA Times. So how do you hook into that?
Well, I have had to be a little bit more creative since the pandemic, but it's a good kind of problem to have because instead of only finding plates in New York, I have had plates for almost all the states. I have a goal to have every state represented on the map for at least the US. And so I have Google alerts for vanity plates and license plates so I can stay up on what's going on. That gets me access to additional people. And I've had interviews that were results of that. Certainly the LA Times article. I use social media a lot. Instagram, people will post themselves with their plates or
Mm.
tag somebody in the picture. I'm in a couple of Facebook groups where people post not only the plates they see, but also their own plates. I really find vanity plates fascinating. I find the reasons behind why people choose them fascinating. So it's a fun hobby for me that always eventually ends up with a really cool conversation with an interesting person. Like I learned some great stuff today about, your philosophy on investing and on the farming industry. Like I learned some very cool things today talking to you. So I really appreciate you being on and sharing your life story, or at least a sliver of it.
Yeah, and it's kind of fun for me to think back on those times.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, I want to just say thank you so much, Sheldon, for being on today and spending some time sharing a little bit about yourself. And I wish you so much success in retirement, staying busy, and lawn bowling and acting and all the fun stuff that you're into. I know that you shared with me when we spoke before that it turns out retirement is really your calling. Like you're really good at it. And it really is like what you've done best in your whole life.
Best job I've ever had.
Yes, exactly. And you would endorse this as a career move for anyone, right?
I would, yes.
Awesome. Well, I wish you and your wife all the best. Enjoy time with your son and your grandchildren. And thank you so much for being on.
Sure thing. All right. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Please subscribe to Trista's Plate Story podcast, share it, or leave a review. If you would like to nominate a license plate to be featured in a future episode, or you have an interesting Plate Story news item to share with me, leave us a comment or visit platestory.com. That's PL8STORY.com and give me all the details. This is Trista Polo, wishing you well on the road to your next adventure.